A confrontation that unfolded not over weeks, but in 12 hours. 12 hours that shattered decades of peaceful coexistence. 12 hours that activated emergency protocols across Central Europe. 12 hours that forced Prague to make its most aggressive military decision since 1993. What Bratislava did today crossed a line that Brussels had hoped would hold, and when that line broke, Prague did not hesitate. They responded with precision, determination, and overwhelming force. For 3 weeks now, there had been signals, not from official channels, not from diplomatic sources, just signals that Slovakia was preparing something unprecedented. Slovakia has been assertive, yes, but they have been calculated in their assertiveness. Their moves have followed a certain rhythm, a pattern, almost a choreography. But what set off alarm bells in Prague this morning was that the pattern went silent. Intelligence officers who monitor cross-border activity know the indicators. The sudden recall of Slovak border guards from leave, the repositioning of military assets near Bratislava, the encrypted communications surge between Slovak defense installations, the sudden cancellation of joint training exercises. All of that went quiet, and whenever Bratislava goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. The tension had been building since Slovakia's new government took power 6 months ago, bringing with it a rhetoric that many in Prague found disturbing. Talk of historical grievances and territorial readjustments that hadn't been heard since the Velvet Divorce of 1993. Czech intelligence services had noticed the pattern early, Slovak military units conducting routine exercises increasingly close to the Czech border, Slovak politicians making inflammatory statements about Czech treatment of Slovak minorities, Slovak media running documentaries about lost Slovak territories now within Czech borders. But it was the silence that worried Prague most. The sudden cessation of all these activities 3 days ago, the radio silence from usually talkative Slovak military contacts, the unexplained closure of several border crossings for maintenance. Czech Defense Minister Jana Černochová had warned Parliament just yesterday, when our neighbors stop talking, we must start watching. Early this morning, Czech military radar detected what they described as a massive mobilization of Slovak mechanized units, including T-72 tanks that had not been deployed operationally in over 15 years. These are the kinds of assets that Slovakia only deploys when they are signaling something very specific: internal security concerns, external defense preparations, or territorial assertions. NATO observers didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Slovakia was changing its military posture. And when a NATO member shifts military posture without explanation, even by a small measure, Prague pays attention. The first reports came in at 04:30 hours. Slovak armored columns moving north from their base at Martin, heading directly toward the Czech border near Hodonín. Not one column, but three, spread across a 60-kilometer front. Czech reconnaissance drones confirmed what satellite imagery had suggested. This wasn't an exercise. Slovak forces had combat loads, full fuel tanks, and were moving in tactical formations. They had established forward command posts. They had deployed electronic warfare units. They had activated air defense systems. Most alarmingly, Slovak Special Forces units, the 5th Special Forces Regiment, had been spotted moving toward key infrastructure points along the border, including the crucial D2 motorway crossing that connects both nations. Prague's response was immediate. Prime Minister Petr Fiala convened an emergency session of the National Security Council. Within minutes, Czech forces were given unprecedented rules of engagement. The message from Prague was clear. Any Slovak incursion would be met with immediate and overwhelming response. What made this revelation particularly shocking was its timing. Slovakia had just participated in a NATO exercise 2 weeks prior alongside Czech forces. They had signed renewed cooperation agreements. Their defense ministers had publicly embraced at a conference in Vienna just last month. The warning issued by Prague tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Czech officials after the emergency cabinet meeting described Slovakia's move as provocative, destabilizing, and perhaps most importantly, reversible if Bratislava acts immediately, but deterrence only works if the target hesitates. Prague did not. In fact, their response today was among the most forceful we've seen in post-Cold War Central Europe. Here's what we know. Within 90 minutes of detecting Slovak movements, Czech forces launched Operation Shield. These weren't the standard border patrols. These were the 7th Mechanized Brigade and 4th Rapid Deployment Brigade, elite units that Czech Republic only deploys when they are preparing to defend sovereign territory. The Czech Air Force scrambled its entire fleet of Jas-39 Gripen fighters, establishing continuous combat air patrols along the Slovak border. Czech Special Forces units took control of every major border crossing, supported by rapid reaction forces equipped with Pandor II armored vehicles and modernized T-72M4 tanks. But Prague's response went beyond military measures. Within hours, Czech Foreign Minister Jan Lipavsky was on the phone with every NATO ambassador in Brussels. The message was unambiguous. Czech Republic would invoke Article 4 consultations if Slovakia continued its aggressive posture. For those unfamiliar, Article 4 of the NATO treaty allows any member to call for consultations when they feel their territorial integrity or security is threatened. It's been invoked only 7 times in NATO's history. The threat to invoke it against another NATO member is unprecedented. Tonight, military sources confirmed that Czech forces launched preemptive defensive operations on 3 key sectors, including the Hodonín corridor that had recently been reinforced for what analysts believe was this exact scenario. Czech forces moved before Slovakia could establish facts on the ground. They secured the Morava River crossings. They secured the E75 highway junction. They secured radar installations that were likely preparing to support Slovak operations. In other words, Prague targeted Slovakia's ability to sustain any cross-border operation, the logistical network that would have made it operational. This is what made Prague's warning so urgent. Slovakia's mobilization wasn't just symbolic, it was actionable. It represented the kind of move that could destabilize all of Central Europe if left unchecked, and Prague, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't mobilize their entire army. They didn't threaten civilian targets. They hit military objectives. They hit command nodes. The sophistication of the Czech response suggests extensive preparation. Intelligence sources indicate that Prague had been wargaming this exact scenario for months, ever since Slovak rhetoric began shifting toward revisionist territorial claims. Czech cyber units also launched what experts are calling defensive offensive operations, not attacking Slovak systems, but establishing digital barriers that would prevent Slovak forces from coordinating any cross-border movement. Slovak military communications networks experienced significant degradation within hours of Czech activation. The Czech 601st Special Forces Group, their most elite unit, was reportedly deployed to secure the Czechia-Slovakia-Austria tri-border area, a region of particular strategic importance due to its proximity to vital energy infrastructure. Most remarkably, Czech forces managed to establish what military experts call escalation dominance, positioning themselves so that any Slovak advance would require Slovakia to be the clear aggressor, making international support for Bratislava impossible. And here's where the story becomes even more complex. Western intelligence sources now believe that Slovakia's latest move was designed to test the cohesion of NATO after recent disagreements over Ukraine policy. Slovakia wanted to see whether NATO would remain neutral in a dispute between 2 members, but instead the opposite happened. NATO leadership didn't equivocate. They issued a statement that was so direct, so unambiguous that even Bratislava noticed. You don't get Slovakia's attention easily, but today Brussels did. Defense analysts speaking with international media under anonymity described Slovakia's shift as opportunistic adventurism, a way to exploit perceived Western distraction with other crises. But Prague proved today that they remain both vigilant and capable. Their military movements were not only swift, they were coordinated so precisely that Slovak forces found themselves outmaneuvered before they could even begin their operation. That coordination matters because it shows Prague's institutional preparedness. It shows that Czech Republic is not simply reacting to events, they are shaping them. The Czech response also revealed capabilities that many observers didn't know Prague possessed. The speed of their electronic warfare deployment, the sophistication of their cyber operations, and the seamless integration of air and ground forces suggested a military that has quietly modernized beyond what public defense budgets would indicate. This deeper capability has implications beyond the current crisis. It signals to any potential aggressor that Czech Republic, despite its size, maintains a defense capability that can impose unacceptable costs on any adversary. As reports continued coming in throughout the day, we learned more about the scale of Prague's response. Czech naval forces carried out emergency deployments on the Elbe River, forcing Slovak commercial traffic to reroute through Hungarian waterways. Czech intelligence services targeted Slovak military communications that had been upgraded in the last 6 months. Czech special forces operating near Břeclav reportedly neutralized electronic warfare systems used by Slovakia to jam NATO surveillance. This wasn't just border reinforcement. This wasn't just diplomatic protest. This was strategic paralysis. This was operational denial. And operational denial is the one thing Slovakia has struggled to overcome since their military modernization program stalled. For every technological advance they have made, Czech forces have countered with something that renders that advance irrelevant. The scope of Czech mobilization is staggering when considered in detail. Over 15,000 troops activated within hours, entire mechanized brigades moving to forward positions, air defense systems creating an impenetrable dome over Czech airspace, and all of this accomplished while maintaining operational security that prevented Slovak intelligence from anticipating the response. Remember, Slovakia thought Prague would seek mediation first. They thought EU institutions would intervene slowly. They thought NATO would remain paralyzed by internal disagreements. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Prague acted unilaterally and decisively. EU leadership backed Czech Republic immediately. NATO issued its strongest statement in years. This miscalculation by Bratislava reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of how much the security environment in Europe has changed since February 2022. The Russian invasion of Ukraine hasn't paralyzed European decision-making, it's accelerated it. European nations, particularly those in Central and Eastern Europe, have developed muscle memory for rapid response to territorial threats. Czech Republic's history makes their response even more significant. This is a nation that knows the cost of appeasement. The Munich Agreement of 1938 taught Czechs that waiting for international intervention while facing aggression leads to catastrophe. That historical memory shapes Prague's doctrine. Act first, act decisively, and create facts that the international community must then address. What makes this moment so dangerous and so unprecedented is that Slovakia's latest move happened at a time when Prime Minister Robert Fico is under intense domestic pressure. Economic hardliners want increased EU funding. Nationalists want territorial revision. Opposition parties want new elections. Pro-Russian factions want Slovakia to leave NATO sanctions regime. Fico is balancing these demands while managing a coalition government hanging by a thread. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. Slovak unemployment has reached 8.2%, its highest level in 5 years. Inflation remains stubbornly high at 12%. The government's approval rating has plummeted to 31%. In this context, external adventurism becomes an attractive option for an embattled leader seeking to rally nationalist support. But Fico miscalculated the regional response. Hungary, traditionally Slovakia's closest ally, remained conspicuously silent. Poland, despite its own issues with Czech Republic, immediately backed Prague. Even Serbia, which maintains close ties with Slovakia, called for restraint and dialogue. The isolation of Slovakia in this crisis is complete. No European nation has expressed even qualified support for Bratislava's military mobilization. This diplomatic isolation compounds the military disadvantage Slovak forces now face. NATO's warning, now distributed to all member states, was designed to signal that the alliance is not willing to tolerate inter-member military confrontation. Officials said plainly that Slovakia's mobilization was inconsistent with Allied solidarity and European security principles. That is diplomatic language for stand down immediately or face complete isolation. You don't usually hear that tone from Brussels unless something serious is at stake. The European Union went even further. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen personally called Prime Minister Fico, reportedly delivering what one EU official described as the most direct warning ever given to an EU member state by the Commission. The message was clear. Any Slovak military action against Czech Republic would trigger immediate suspension of EU funding, including the billions in recovery funds Slovakia desperately needs for its economic stabilization program. Meanwhile, Czech Prime Minister Peter Fiala addressed the nation in a calm, resolute speech tonight. He said, Czech Republic has extended the hand of friendship to all our neighbors for 3 decades. He said, that hand remains extended, but it will not be bitten. And he said, we will defend every meter of Czech soil with the full might of our democracy. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a leader that understands just how high the stakes have become. Fiala's speech, delivered in Czech, Slovak, and English, was carefully crafted to speak to multiple audiences. To Czechs, it was reassurance. To Slovaks, it was a final warning. To the international community, it was a declaration that Prague would not be intimidated. The Prime Minister's decision to deliver part of the speech in Slovak was particularly pointed, a reminder that these are brother nations with shared history, and that this confrontation benefits neither. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Slovakia's latest move wasn't isolated. Along with the military mobilization, Slovak intelligence services also increased surveillance of Czech diplomatic facilities. Pro-government media launched coordinated disinformation campaigns about Czech aggression. Slovak cyber units increased probing attacks targeting Czech critical infrastructure. All of this happened within the same 12-hour period. When Bratislava moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. The coordination suggests weeks, possibly months, of preparation. Slovak military movements were too precise, too synchronized to be spontaneous. Supply depots had been pre-positioned. Communication protocols had been rehearsed. Even the propaganda narrative had been prepared in advance. This level of preparation makes de-escalation more difficult. Slovakia has invested significant resources in this operation. Backing down now would represent not just a tactical retreat, but a strategic humiliation for Fico's government. Security analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Slovakia is preparing a limited incursion to test Czech resolve. Another is that Slovakia is attempting to force NATO to mediate, hoping to extract concessions from Prague. A third possibility, and the one worrying officials the most, is that Slovakia is attempting to create a frozen conflict that would give them leverage in future negotiations. But today, Prague took that card off the table. They didn't wait for NATO consultation. They didn't seek EU mediation first. They didn't limit themselves to diplomatic protests. They established military facts on the ground that make any Slovak adventure impossible. Czech strategic planning appears to have anticipated each of these scenarios. By rapidly securing all major border crossings and establishing surveillance dominance over the frontier region, Prague has made any Slovak military option prohibitively costly. The Czech military's forward deployment also serves a psychological purpose. It demonstrates to the Slovak military leadership, many of whom trained alongside their Czech counterparts, that Prague is serious about defense and that any order to advance would be met with professional military resistance. What we're watching now is a test of European security architecture. Slovakia wants to see if historical grievances can override treaty obligations. Czech Republic wants to show that small democracies can defend themselves decisively. NATO wants to prevent the first armed conflict between two member states, and the EU wants to prevent the collapse of Central European integration. Each actor in this drama has constraints and imperatives that make the situation exceptionally volatile. One miscalculation, one nervous soldier, one technical malfunction could spiral into something neither Prague nor Bratislava can control. Tonight, we've heard from military sources who are now continuously monitoring the situation. They say Slovak forces have halted their advance but remain in forward positions. They say Czech electronic warfare capabilities have essentially blinded Slovak reconnaissance efforts. And they say Slovakia's decision to maintain their mobilization is likely part of a face-saving strategy intended to extract some concession from Prague. But Czech Republic is not offering any. In fact, Prague is increasing pressure. Their response today, swift, decisive, and overwhelming, sent a message to Bratislava that Czech Republic will not be intimidated. And it sent a message to Brussels that Prague can handle its own security when necessary. Additional Czech reserves have been called up. The Czech parliament has authorized emergency defense spending. And perhaps most significantly, Czech arms manufacturers have been ordered to increase production of critical munitions, a signal that Prague is prepared for a prolonged standoff if necessary. As the night goes on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Bratislava hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that Prague's response was timely. It prevented a fait accompli, it maintained Czech territorial integrity, and it demonstrated that NATO's smallest members can defend themselves. What happens next will depend on what Slovakia does in the next 24 hours. If they withdraw, this moment will be remembered as a dangerous miscalculation that ultimately strengthened European unity. If they maintain their aggressive posture, Prague has already shown they are prepared. They have shown they are ready to respond. The international community is now fully engaged. The UN Security Council has scheduled an emergency session. The OSCE has offered to mediate. Even the Vatican has expressed concern about the situation in Central Europe. But ultimately, this crisis will be resolved by decisions made in Prague and Bratislava, not New York or Brussels. And tonight, for the first time in decades, Slovakia appears to be reconsidering. Bratislava is quiet. too quiet. And when Bratislava is quiet, it means they are calculating. It means they are choosing their next move carefully, because tonight, Slovakia learned something for the first time. Czech Republic will not hesitate. Czech Republic will not negotiate under duress. And Czech Republic has capabilities that Slovakia never fully appreciated. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. The post-Cold War assumption of eternal peace in Central Europe has been shattered. The Czech military has proven itself capable of rapid, decisive action, and NATO faces its gravest internal crisis since its founding, and we will be here watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.